Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel! If you're a crafter who lives in the States, you've probably heard about Joann closing. It's really sad and a big loss for so many makers, especially people in rural areas where they may not have access to a fabric store and Joann's the closest thing they can get. If you're not someone who works with fabrics, you may not understand why this is such a big deal. It's really important to see and feel fabric before starting a project with it so you know what you're getting into, and now that option is being taken away from so many people. It's really a huge bummer. So in honor of Joann Fabrics and how much it's meant to me over the years, I decided to do a project this week that is exclusively using Joann products. So today I'm teaching you how to reverse applique on a sweatshirt, but you can use this same method for any other project. It doesn't have to be a sweatshirt. Now this sounds and looks a lot more intimidating than it is, but I would say that this is actually an easy to average project. So with that being said, let's get into it. For materials, you'll need the following: letter or shape stencils. I use these letter stickers, but you can also use shapes or something else if you like. And honestly, if this is your first time doing this or you're not as experienced, I would go with a bigger stencil than a smaller one. A piece of cardstock, scissors, a sweatshirt, assorted fabrics, Pellin SF101 interfacing, an iron, a removable fabric marking pencil, an embroidery hoop, embroidery floss, a needle, fabric scissors, fabric snips, and thread in your sweatshirt color. Additionally, you may need some pins, and if you don't want to use your hands to reinforce the stitching at the end of this project, you may want to use a sewing machine. Ideally, you should wash and dry all of your fabrics before starting. Obviously not the interfacing, especially if you're using anything new. If these are old fabrics that you've washed and used before, don't worry about it, but new fabrics tend to have a coating on them, and it may make it a little more difficult for the interfacing to stick to it if it's not been washed. I forgot to do this step, but I realized it as I was applying the interfacing, and it's something I wish I had done before I started.
I started by making my stencils. I put my stickers down on a piece of old cardstock and then carefully cut them out. This will make them easier to trace and also reusable for future projects. Next, I started laying out my stencils on my different fabrics to figure out how I wanted this to look. Then I cut rectangles of the fabric out. You don't have to go too big, but enough to be able to lock the edges in the embroidery hoop later.
Once everything was cut out, it's time to add interfacing. Interfacing is used as a stabilizing layer for this applique process. It'll give structural support to any areas where there may be any stretching or sagging, and just make sure that your piece will stay nice over time.
I cut the interfacing to match the size of the fabric and followed the directions that are on the piece of paper that comes with the interfacing. Placing the fabric down correctly, steam ironing around the outer edges, then applying a thin damp towel over everything and pressing, and lastly giving one last press on top of the right side of the fabric so everything is fused together.
I did this with every piece of fabric and then moved on to stenciling.
I laid out the letters across the sweatshirt and adjusted them until they were centered and spaced the way I wanted them to be. Then I used my fabric marking pencil and outlined the letters. With my sweatshirt flat on the table, I put my interfaced fabric inside the sweatshirt with the colorful fabric facing the top of the sweatshirt. You can add a pin here to hold the fabric in place. Then put on your embroidery hoop so it's got the front of the sweatshirt and that colorful fabric piece locked down. The sweatshirt should be taut while in the hoop. You may need extra pins here to keep your colorful fabric taut if you're using a hoop that is too large. Now pull out your embroidery floss and needle. I cut the floss into strands that are about 12 inches ahead of time. Embroidery floss is made out of 6 threads, which is too thick for embroidery. So I divide the floss strands so that I have 2 threads per strand before starting. Thread the needle and tie off an anchor knot at the end of the strings. Then start to sew a back stitch along the stenciled lines that you created. Go all the way around, and once done, cut the excess colorful fabric off so that you have 1/4 inch border around the letter that you just embroidered, and remove the hoop. With your fabric snips, carefully snip at the sweatshirt fabric inside of the stitching you just did. I would take my snip and sort of prick at the sweatshirt layer in the middle until it slowly started to make a hole. Once you have an opening, very carefully snip along the inside of the stitching, leaving at least 1/8 inch excess on the inside of the stitching. Once everything is cut out, you should have something that looks like this: visible color fabric, an edge of the sweatshirt fabric inside and on top of the edge of the letter, and your embroidery stitching. You're going to repeat this process over again for every letter until you're done.
Which means it's time for the reveal. Here it is. I think this turned out really cute and I'm really happy with it. I was thinking about it and worried that this might be my last craft from Joann, but I'm thinking I might actually go back, get a different colored sweatshirt, and then get green fabrics and make a Joann sweatshirt, but we'll see if I have time to do that. But I really love the fabrics I used, and I really love that some of these little candy corns came through on some of the letters. I was also going to originally change the stitching so that it was different color every letter, but I really think the orange helps keep it cohesive across the whole piece and just looks really nice all together. I was also thinking about about adding some star-shaped elbow patches to this sweater, but I'm not sure about that. So let me know what you think, and if you think it's a good idea, maybe I'll make a short showing that process. Once finished, it is a good idea to take a sewing machine or by hand go in and reinforce your stitching really close to the stitch or on top of the stitch, even if you have the same thread and you know how to do that properly. I would just take the same color of your sweatshirt, like this black, and go in right next to the stitch with a sewing machine and lock in the stitching just so nothing moves. I will be doing that in the future, and I wanted to mention it. Like I said, reverse applique isn't super difficult, but it is something that seems a little bit intimidating, and I don't want you to feel intimidated by it. You may need to look up more tips for back stitching or embroidering if you're not used to sewing, but really I think it's something that anyone can do. I think the hardest part of this project is actually the timing. If you're not used to embroidering, this is going to take you a lot longer. The fastest letters I did were the O's, and those were still around 25 minutes each, so it's something you want to keep in mind when starting this project. But I wouldn't let that deter you because I ended up doing this whole sweatshirt in one evening. So it's really up to you and your experience level. Anyway, let me know what kind of reverse applique you want to try at home. I would love to hear. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!